If I had left the office 5 minutes earlier, if I had ignored the call, if I had decided, just once, to put myself first, I never would have seen my boss slumped over the steering wheel of his car, engine still running, headlights cutting through the rain like a silent cry for help. But life doesn't ask for permission before changing everything. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I had just microwaved leftover pasta, kicked off my shoes, and sat down after another exhausting day. The name flashing on my screen made me hesitate. Mark Henderson, my boss. A man known more for his sharp tone and impossible deadlines than for anything resembling warmth. I picked up anyway. There was no voice on the other end. Just breathing. Uneven. Heavy. "Mark?" I said, sitting up. "Are you okay?" A faint, slurred response came through. Something I couldn't fully understand, followed by what sounded like a car door slamming, or maybe it was his head hitting something. Then silence. Most people would have called it in. Maybe contacted the police. Maybe ignored it entirely. After all, Mark wasn't exactly the kind of boss who inspired loyalty. He barely remembered birthdays, never said thank you, and once criticized me for taking a sick day when I could barely stand. But something about that call didn't sit right with me. So I grabbed my keys and drove. The address I had for him led me to a quiet, upscale neighborhood on the edge of the city. Rain poured steadily, blurring the streetlights and turning the world into a hazy reflection. I drove slowly, scanning the sidewalks, the driveways. Then I saw it. A black sedan parked crookedly halfway onto the curb. Headlights still on. I pulled over and ran through the rain. Mark was inside, exactly as I feared, slumped over, his forehead resting against the steering wheel, one hand loosely gripping a half-empty bottle. The car was still running. "Mark!" I knocked on the window, then tried the door. Unlocked. The smell of alcohol hit me immediately, thick and overwhelming. He groaned as I gently shook his shoulder. "Hey, come on. You can't stay here." It took effort, patience, and more strength than I thought I had, but eventually, I managed to get him out of the car. He could barely walk, his weight leaning heavily on me as we stumbled toward his front door. I kept thinking, why am I doing this? But deep down, I knew the answer. Because someone should. The house was beautiful, large, quiet, almost too perfect. Lights were on inside. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. After a few seconds, the door opened. And that's when everything changed. She stood there, staring at us. Mark's wife. I had seen her once before, briefly, at a company event. Elegant, composed, the kind of woman who seemed untouchable. But tonight, she looked different. Tired. Worried. Human. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Oh my God. Mark?" "He called me," I said quickly. "I found him outside. He was in his car, he shouldn't have been driving." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Just looked at him, then at me. And then, instead of panic or anger, something softer crossed her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Please, bring him in." We guided him inside and onto a couch. She moved with calm efficiency, grabbing a blanket, placing a pillow under his head, checking his pulse like she had done this before. That thought stayed with me. Like she had done this before. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back. I didn't know who else to call. "You did the right thing," she replied, adjusting the blanket. "Most people wouldn't have come." There was something in her voice, gratitude, yes, but also a hint of something deeper. Sadness, maybe. I turned to leave, feeling like I had crossed into a space I didn't belong. "Wait," she said. I paused. "Can you stay, just for a few minutes?" I hesitated, then nodded. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 cups of tea. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment, the sound of rain filling the room. "I'm Emily," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "I mean, I've seen you before. At the company dinner." She gave a small, tired smile. "Right." Her eyes drifted to Mark, sleeping heavily on the couch. "He wasn't always like this," she said suddenly. I didn't respond, but I listened. "He used to be kind. Funny. The kind of man who would pull over just to help a stranger change a tire." She let out a quiet breath. But somewhere along the way, something broke. I glanced at Mark, trying to reconcile the man she described with the one I knew. "Work," she continued. "Pressure. Expectations. He started drinking more. Coming home later. Becoming someone I barely recognize." There was no bitterness in her voice. Just honesty. "I've tried," she added. "Talking, supporting, even threatening to leave. Nothing sticks." I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing that felt true. "I'm sorry." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "You stayed," she said. "You didn't have to. He's not exactly easy to work with." I almost laughed. "That's one way to put it." She smiled faintly. "Kindness like that, it matters more than you think." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. It was just the right thing to do. "No," she said gently. "It was the harder thing to do." That stayed with me. Because she was right. Doing nothing would have been easier. Safer. Expected. But I didn't. And for the first time in a long time, that felt important. After a while, I stood to leave. "Thank you again," she said, walking me to the door. "It's okay," I replied. "I hope he gets better." She nodded, though her eyes suggested she wasn't sure. As I stepped out into the rain, she called after me. "Wait." I turned. Then she did something I never expected. She hugged me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't long. But it was real. A quiet, grateful hug from someone who had been carrying too much for too long. "Thank you," she whispered. And just like that, I understood. Sometimes, kindness doesn't fix everything. It doesn't solve addiction. It doesn't heal broken relationships overnight. But it reminds people they're not alone. The next day at work, I expected things to go back to normal. Cold emails. Sharp remarks. Distance. But when Mark walked into the office, something was different. He looked tired. Not just physically, but deeply, like someone who had seen something he couldn't ignore. He called me into his office. For a moment, I braced myself. "About last night," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I heard what you did." I nodded, unsure where this was going. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, he said, "Thank you." I blinked, surprised. It wasn't much. 2 simple words. But coming from him, it meant everything. Over the next few weeks, small changes followed. He started leaving earlier. Drinking less, at least, from what I could tell. He even apologized once in a meeting when he snapped at someone. It wasn't a complete transformation. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all it takes. One evening, as I packed up to leave, I found a note on my desk. No name. Just handwriting I recognized. Kindness is contagious. You reminded me of who I used to be. I'm trying to find my way back. M. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Because in a world that often feels harsh and indifferent, moments like that matter. Not because they're big or dramatic, but because they're real. Because they remind us that even the smallest act of humanity can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. That night, I didn't just bring my drunk boss home. I brought a piece of someone back to life. And somehow, in the process, I found something in myself too.